Oh, I'm a bad student. I got to make sure I have that article open you sent me. I read
I,
it.
I have it open. So happy Friday,
Yeah,
first Friday of September.
yeah, long weekend.
Long weekend, long hot weekend. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do to escape the heat to get my training going this weekend. I think I've planned two trips out to Mount Charleston at least. How
You're
about
you're
you?
you're going to take advantage of the heat training. That's what you're going to do.
But the problem is my next race is in end of October in St. George. It's not going to be hot.
I love it.
If I was going to Kona or something like that, or getting ready for a race in Miami, okay. But I just, yeah, it's so funny because normally I'd be all, yeah, heat training. But then again, John, I rode my bike home from work yesterday
Did you?
and my Garmin hit 114 at one point.
That's hot.
That's hot. And I was thinking, oh, this is great training. It's an hour and 15-minute ride, and probably I'm getting the physiologic benefit of a 2 hour ride.
Yeah, and I wasn't commuting this week, but yeah, I know anything over 110 is just hot. And then you're getting hit with the pavement heat on top of any environment heat as well. And
Yeah, every time I just stop at a light, I was just like, oh my gosh, like,
yeah.
because you don't get the wind across you anymore, and
Hmm.
instantly you just start dripping, and I'm like, I'm sweating the same rate when I'm moving.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
right.
just evaporating it, and
That's right.
so it was an hour and 15 minutes, and I had three full bottles of
Oh,
fluid,
oh.
and yeah, it was. But hey, once again, it's like that's good. That's a good heat
Yeah.
stress for me.
Well, I did a 40-mile ride today, and I take my Camelback now
Yeah.
because it just, the multiple bottles works, but at the same time, and for me, it's just easy to throw on the Camelback, and I got ice water the whole time,
Yeah.
and that helps a little bit.
So you're gonna try and do something special for the long weekend as far as training, or
No, because right now I'm mostly just on the an upswing of my training, getting back into some fitness, and the next race I have is a sprint, so I'm just prepping for that, and then I've got a longer race at the end of the year to go to Indian Wells, do the 70.3, so I got plenty of time
yeah.
to really build up fitness, but right now I'm on an upswing because this has been a tough year.
Yeah.
And and I think this goes along with what we're going to talk about tonight, in terms of recovery. Another one of our favorite topics are.
Yeah.
But so
So
nothing special. I'll probably just do a nice long ride tomorrow and do a decent run on Sunday. And
so get up early tomorrow morning and hit the road.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't sleep in much. So
So you might as well be riding.
how about you? What do you got?
I'm gonna swim tomorrow, and then I'm gonna ride indoors. I think just
Okay.
easy a recovery ride,
Yep.
and then Sunday I'm gonna go to Mount Charleston, and probably Monday I'll go to Mount Charleston as well. I'll do two different rides. One
Okay.
day I think I'm gonna drive up and actually just kind of go back and forth between the two canyons
Okay. Where do you park for that? Do you park at the?
at the Spring Valley Visitors Center,
Okay.
and then which is nice because they have a little shop there. They get
Mhm.
dollar cans of Coke, which is really nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And but I'll have my car there. And then one day I think on Monday I'll park at the bottom and go all the way up, but I'll leave early.
Hmm.
And then by the time you get up to the top, it's like 9 o'clock,
Yeah.
and it's not like too bad. Monday's supposed to be the cooler of the 3 days, so
Hmm. Well,
that's the plan.
it's so beautiful up there, and it is nice out. It's just a little cooler. It takes the edge off it.
Well,
Uh,
up there it'll be 80, 85 degrees,
right, right.
which makes a huge difference.
Mhm.
And then coming back down, even if I go all the way, if it's 110, but I'm going 30 miles an hour or
Yeah,
35 an
right.
hour, it doesn't really matter. You don't notice until you stop.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
that'll be the training plan for me.
we were hiking last weekend, and afterwards went and checked out the hilltop camp areas, see if I could get my trailer into one. They're a little tight.
They are a little tight. The one at the top of Lee Canyon, is that where you were?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it McAllister?
Hilltop. Yeah.
There's like two different names though. There's two different campgrounds up there, I think.
Mm.
One looks tighter than the other.
Hmm.
So yeah, but I think you could do it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few spots that if I got in there before, because there's no reservations, I don't think. for up there. So you gotta first come, first serve.
Yeah, and it depends on the time of year. Sometimes it's really
Yeah.
easy. Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, so that's the training plan. The other thing that's going on this week is I'm building my bike.
Yeah, how's that going?
Oh man, it is just a slugfest.
You'd think it's easy.
You
I
think
mean, it's just put the brakes on, put
you
the
think
cranks on, and it's not.
everything takes 2 to 3 times longer than you think it's going to
That's
take.
right,
Right.
right.
So this week I tried to do all the cabling, all the
Yeah.
electric cabling, and then also the brake cabling.
Mm.
And just stuff was happening that shouldn't be happening. Like I broke this little piece off, and I'm like,
Yeah,
that can't be functional. And I looked at
yeah,
my old bike, and it doesn't appear to be functional.
right.
And then I cabled the front, and I got it all exactly how I wanted, and just one little strand of
Oh,
cable. You know how that goes?
yeah, yeah,
On the wrong side of a bolt, and oh shoot!
yeah,
So
yeah.
after an hour dealing with that, I'm like, okay, forget it, take it out, new cable in. It should be really quick, especially for someone that's like the same bike that I've rebuilt my own bikes before. Like I've recabled, like a brake cabled, done that. So I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, how hard can it be? Just do
Hmm.
it. It's Yeah, John. Honestly, like I think was it Tuesday? No, Monday night. I think I was in the garage for like 3 hours, and my wife comes out. She's like, "So you done?" I'm about
Yeah,
a third of the way done, and then a couple more hours another night. And I don't even think I'm halfway.
yeah. Well, it is amazing because sometimes, like you said, you get going and you do one part of a project, but then all of a sudden one step was done out of sequence,
Yeah, that
and
was the
you
other
got to
thing that happened.
redo the whole thing.
It's like the instructions said do this way. I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
save time if I go the other way. And then all of a sudden you're 2 or 3 steps down the road, and like, yeah, the instructions were right.
Yeah, right,
Like I really should have put that cable through before this one. And but honestly, and you notice like it's your bike and it's a labor of love.
right.
So like there's no point am I in a rush, and I want to make it perfect.
Yep,
So like, and I'm torquing everything with a torque wrench,
yep.
making
Hmm.
sure like
Hmm.
everything is perfect. Where it says to grease, I'm greasing it.
Yeah,
And yeah, like there's love being put into this, and that also makes a difference. Like if I was working as a mechanic at a bike shop and doing this all day, there would be not
totally
nearly
different.
much love.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I'd be better at it. But it
That's
just
right. And if you were doing it every day, exactly, you'd be able to do it quicker. But
yeah.
there's all these little decisions that you need to make, these micro decisions that certainly add up. But this is a good lesson is that, people buy your second bike or third bike or whatever it is, well before you actually need it,
Yeah.
because now you can, take your time on putting it together and you're not pressed for time and not, pressured that way.
I told myself I was going to try and ride it on Labor Day, but that's not going to happen. Well,
Right.
the one problem also was, and I think we talked about this, was sourcing parts. So I'm literally missing out one piece
Hmm.
that it was sold out throughout the world.
Yeah.
I finally got it out of this place in England, and I've been tracking it. It was in England for like 5 days, and then somehow it's in Belgium.
Oh,
And now I got the notice today it's in the United States at a sorting facility,
oh, goodness.
but I don't know where in the United States. And I literally cannot finish the bike. It is a connector between the front and the back's Di2.
Mm,
And I'm like, just so even if I did finish, I
yeah.
still can't plug it in. So
Oh, goodness.
but once again, it's not a hurry. This is not a rush job.
Yep.
And honestly, it's fun. And
Mhm.
I don't know if we talked about it before, but I also have installed air conditioning in my garage.
Oh, that's great.
And so I actually went and put in solar powered air conditioning in my
There you go.
garage. And I'm telling you, when it's like 75 degrees in your garage at
Yeah,
5 o'clock in the evening in Las Vegas, it's 110 outside, I'm feeling like I'm winning.
there you go.
I would have never been able to do this, especially this heat wave we're having in
Yeah,
the
right.
evenings in my garage. Have just been,
Hmm.
I would have to have 3 bottles of water just for an
Yeah.
hour of building my bike.
Oh, I was just down in the garage for a little bit today, and you're right. You just sweat so much. It's so hot.
Yep.
So that's really nice that you set up and to run it off solar. That's
Yep.
impressive.
Yeah, super, super nice setup. Maybe one day we'll go out there and I'll show everyone my garage setup. Once my bike is built. We'll do a bike reveal. That's
There you
what
go.
we'll do on the podcast.
I love it.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about delayed onset muscle soreness,
Yep.
what it is, how to avoid it, and I guess maybe what it's telling your body. And I think that's really an important thing. And John, we've talked a lot about like listening to your body.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times we get caught up in triathlon of saying, oh, I have to do a long run today, or I have to do this training session today. It's a weird thing in triathlon that people say that, right? I don't, maybe, I've been in sports a long time, so I've seen it in other sports as well. I have to do this training, but I think in triathlon it may be even worse. I think, and we've talked about this before, I think most triathletes train too much anyways. I know I do.
Right.
And the have to is oftentimes built off of a program or a plan, either from a coach or from a book. The plan says today I do this, and it becomes very difficult when your body is not responding how you'd like it to, and you're getting sore. Your muscles are becoming more sore, and those sore muscles they're ultimately telling you something.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting story of delayed onset muscle soreness, because it tells you an awful lot. So it can tell you when you've been training too hard for too long, but it can also tell you, this is actually a really fun one to think about. It can tell you if you were not prepared to race when you did race. So if you're extra sore after a race, you might not have actually trained properly for that race. So I'll give you the anecdote here, and you raced this race as well, was the 70.3 Worlds last year,
right,
with the downhill, and we've talked about the downhill run and how that destroyed people. It destroyed me, and I'm the first one to admit I didn't do enough downhill running at pace on a steep downhill like that was. And I paid for it. I mean, my delayed onset muscle soreness was pretty rough. I don't know.
I think you're not alone there.
Yeah, and and think about it, like, just people don't go out and do that very often, right? Hey, let's find a 12% downhill and run it fast in training. It's an interesting thing. I read a lot of training journals, and they often put in hill running, but they say sprint up the hill, jog down the hill. But if you're going to race that has a significant amount of downhill, you actually have to train it. And train your muscles to take on that load. So I think DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, once again, it can give you a lot if you listen to it. If I was to race that same race this year, I would do a lot more downhill running. Now, subsequently, they've changed the course for this year.
Oh, did they? They came out with the maps. Okay.
The maps are out, and there is not the downhill like that anymore.
Oh, all right.
So they're running through. Do you know where the golf course is when you go out, just before you go up the hill? So they're running in through the golf course, and they're looping through the golf course, and then coming back and then running more in downtown.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's a lot less climbing or descending on the run. The bike course is almost exactly the same. There's a few differences to it. But I for one was glad, because I'm like, I don't really want to go out and crush my quadriceps training lots of downhill running. But I think that once again, like, listening to your body and listening to what it's telling you, both in training and after races, can actually help you build your program.
Well, let's start with a definition as best as possible for DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. What do you got? Well,
the definition is easy if you think about it, more so of what you feel. So it is what it says, right? Delayed, so after onset happening, muscle soreness. So the easiest way to think about this is, if you haven't been to the gym in a while, and you're like, oh, I haven't been to the gym in a while, and I'm paying my $30 a month to the gym, I better go because I haven't been in a month. If this sounds familiar to anybody, this is a pretty regular thing, I think. And like, oh yeah, I want to hit up that bench press. And like, oh yeah, when I was here a month ago, I was bench pressing like 150 pounds. So yeah, I could probably do that again. and you might actually be able to, right? But then the next day or the day after, your chest is on fire and you can't move.
Yeah.
That is the best example I can give you of what DOMS is. Now, if we take it a step further, what it is truly it's damage to the muscle, right? And there's lots of pieces, and we look at the research. There's lots of different like physiologic pieces to where in the muscle fiber the damage is, and it can be in different pieces. So we have the muscle cell, the myocyte. So we have lots of different moving parts in that, and there can be derangement in different parts. And I don't want to get into the exact physiology here because that's a little bit too deep. But it is damage. It's actually, some people call it micro tears or micro damage to the muscle cells or the muscle fibers themselves. So I guess, John, if I was to ask you this without you, and I know you know this stuff, but let me ask, if you were a layperson and I said, hey, you're going to go training and you're going to damage your muscles. Does that sound like a good thing?
Wait, how am I answering this?
As a layperson.
As a layperson?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, or let's say I was advising you. You're like, I want to go training. I'm like, okay, here's our goal. Our goal is to go damage your muscles.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's commonly accepted that you got to stress the system and then it will respond. But when you put it that way, I don't think people are thinking that training is damaging anything in the body. But that's what training is
Yeah.
controlled damage, I guess, is a better way to look at it. But not this heavy sudden stress that you're not ready for, and literally does too much damage to the muscle. But the delayed part is always the interesting part. It's not fully understood,
Yeah.
but this type of soreness is not what you would have during exercise. It's not like you're saying on the bench press. It's not like you're getting sore while you do the bench press. You may be a little bit sore, but that's not the soreness we're talking about.
We're
It's the
talking about
soreness
later.
that shows up. I don't know. The paper we
Usually
read.
the next day, usually.
Yeah. But the paper we read though was interesting. I think they did say 10 hours later, and I'm like, that's really soon. But usually it's 24, 48 hours afterwards. Now all of a sudden that soreness comes out, and that's the delayed part.
For me, usually it's the next morning when I wake up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But and I guess from my understanding, my reading is some of the pathophysiology or the reasoning behind why it's so sore is the swelling that occurs. So it's important to kind of separate out swelling from inflammation, even though it's a characteristic of inflammation. But the swelling itself is putting pressure on nerve fibers, and nerve fibers themselves that cause pain are called nociceptive fibers. And these fibers do not do well with pressure. And that's what stimulates we think a lot of the pain reception is actually just this pressure. And so the paper we read had some MRI images showing swelling and showing actual fluid buildup in the muscle. And so we can actually see this in MRI, where we actually see increase in fluid within the muscle. So I think that's part of the pain side of things.
Yeah.
And I think the pain side is part of it, but then we add into that the actual damage, which causes dysfunction. And then we can even take it a step further. We want to go back to the neural side. We also have nerves that send information to muscles. So our efferent nerves sending information to muscles. Those also don't respond well to swelling, and they don't fire or they're not stimulated appropriately at the place where the nerve meets the muscle. It's called the neuromuscular junction. They're not stimulated properly when there is a lot of swelling in the area. So I think that this is kind of twofold in its response.
Well, and what's interesting, the paper did not even go to the extreme DOMS, which would be rhabdomyolysis. And they didn't mention it at all, which is interesting. But rhabdomyolysis is where that damage gets so bad, it can actually be life-threatening.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't really see that often in triathlon. We see that more in CrossFit, and we see that in heavy weight training. There was a really famous case out of the University of Iowa. This is probably 15 years ago now, where the football team came back from winter break or spring break. I can't remember what it was, and they did 150 squats in one day.
Yep.
And then I can't remember how many ended up being hospitalized, and several ended up having kidney failure because of just too much damage. Like you can do the point where you can actually do so much damage that you get a release of is it myoglobin? Yes, myoglobin into the bloodstream, and then that will actually block up the kidneys.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, and this paper was really good at bringing this up, is triathlon is it's really a unique sport in that swimming and biking don't really cause DOMS.
No, not as much, right?
And it's mostly running. I mean, you can get DOMS from swimming and biking.
Yep.
But it's not as significant. And so I guess at this point, John, why don't you talk about the difference between a concentric and an eccentric contraction?
So a concentric contraction, well, let's start with the muscle is always trying to shorten. That's what it's designed to do, is you've got these fibers that interact with each other, and they're always trying to pull each other towards the center of the muscle cell, or really the functional unit, what we call the sarcomere. And so a concentric contraction is when the muscle contracts and it actually gets shorter. Concentric. Eccentric contraction, the muscle is trying to contract, but it actually gets longer. But it's still trying to contract, but it's being pulled apart as it's trying to contract. So and the isometric would be the other kind of contraction where it's same length, it doesn't change the length. So you just contract in it and it stays that length.
The way I always think about it in kind of layperson's terms is the concentric is if you're lifting a weight, it's the pulling towards you or the lifting of the weight. The eccentric is the lowering of the weight. And for just an example in running, when you're pushing off, that's a concentric contraction. And because when we push off, we actually become airbound and we have to land. The landing is an eccentric contraction.
Well, this is where it gets a little complicated.
It is more complicated now, but I'm doing it for the layperson. But then if we look at swimming or cycling, there's no landing phase. There's no deceleration phase. Right. So it's an interesting thing. Like swimmers very rarely report DOMS. They can be sore
from swimming, right?
But from swimming itself. But you put them in the weight room.
Yeah, right.
And they'll have DOMS.
Or do plyometrics
and it's actually one of the reasons why cyclists can cycle so dang much. Right. And it's not an uncommon thing for like high level cyclists to 30-40 hour training weeks. Low intensity for 30 or 40 hours, and they don't get sore.
Right.
And it's because they're not doing that eccentric component. And it's one of the limiting factors in runners, and why runners can only run so much is the breakdown of muscle that occurs during that eccentric contraction. But yes, you're right.
No, it's okay, because this is a good distinction to make, is that when you're running on the level, what's really interesting is the muscle may actually just be contracting isometrically. And then what's stretching is the tendon unit. But this is why I'm glad you've already mentioned this. This is why going downhill is going to be more damaging than running on the level, because going downhill, you are contracting eccentrically. And that's where that damage to the muscle really occurs. And when you are running, even if you run, because I know there's the Revel Marathon that's downhill, and people will run from wherever, the lodge up at Mount Charleston down to the highway, and that takes a toll on you. We went hiking last weekend, and we didn't even do a steep trail, but boy, I had some DOMS after that, just because of that downhill part, and you are contracting eccentrically at that point.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this whole thing, and I think you mentioned it right in the beginning, is when we have delayed onset muscle soreness, it's usually a sign that your body's not prepared for the load.
Yeah.
Right? And so one of the ways to avoid this is to slowly ramp yourself into
Mhm.
this type of activity. So I mentioned, well, if I was to do that course again, I would do more downhill running,
Right.
but I wouldn't just go out and sprint down, 12% grades. I would slowly start building up more running or more downhill running.
Yeah.
And in the past, when I've been training for hilly courses, I really been focusing on the uphill,
Yeah.
running the uphill hard, and then take it a little easier on the downhill. But subsequently, I've been really thinking about this and trying to wrap my head around running the downhills harder. But once again, not like today, go out and run a bunch of hard downhills, but slowly bringing myself into it. And it's the same with the weight training, right? That same person we talked about, if they start going in and doing bench pressing, 2 or 3 times a week and religiously do it for a couple of months, or even a month, they're not going to have DOMS anymore.
Right.
Even if they increase the load significantly, or not significantly, if they increase the load, but smart, in a smart way, they won't have DOMS.
Well, and what's interesting, and so you're getting to this, and the article sort of really focused on the recovery part, but they also mentioned that when you do have DOMS, you start moving differently.
Yep.
And so now this is really a training issue that if you end up with, if you train on Monday and you have DOMS on Tuesday or even Wednesday, and you're running differently, well, now you can just create this death spiral where now you're introducing new stress because you're running differently than what you're normally trained for. And this becomes a real sort of rabbit that you got to chase, or that you don't want to be chasing, because it can take you down a path that really leads to some serious injuries.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because one of the things that we've talked about before is the body is kind of the master at figuring out how to do things, right? Like, hey, my calves have DOMS, so I'm going to run.
Yeah, right.
So what am I going to do to my brain's going to do this, right? I don't want to have pain.
Yeah.
But what am I going to do to do this? Oh, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my hamstrings a little bit more to extend. I'm going to use my glutes a little bit more to extend. And so I'm going to take the pressure off of my calves.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you can get away with that for a short amount of time. We were basically accommodating, right? But if your body's not used to that, then the next thing happens is you get a hamstring strain or you get a glute strain.
Yeah.
And this is the danger of the human body, is that we can do this, right? But so if that was the case, I think you can still run, but instead of your 10-mile run, maybe do a 4-mile run, right? So you're giving your body a chance to adapt to the new normal, the new stress, because the new stress is different than the old stress.
Yeah.
It's happened to all of us. We've all done this.
No, that's spot on. And I think the metric I use, and this is an anecdote, is if I start running, I have the soreness and the stiffness in the beginning. If it doesn't loosen up, relatively quickly, I'm cutting my run short, because I know I'm running differently, and I don't want to introduce a new stress that's going to lead to an injury that I don't want to deal with.
Yeah. And here's the thing, John, it's different during a race, right? Let's say you're doing an Ironman and you're in hour 2 of your Ironman, and you're feeling something like, and you're going to change the way you run just so you can finish the race.
Yeah, we all do.
That's everybody, right? That's not even an option when we were getting to these races, but it's when you're training, and it is optional, right? And once again, we fall victim to the plan says this, but my legs don't agree with this, but I can still do it. Like, you could do that 10-mile run. But at what cost? And I think, once again, if we listen to our body and listen to what it's telling us, I think that we can become more successful. But John, you and I have both fell victim to this.
Oh, I was just thinking, it's easy to say this, it's hard to do it.
So easy to say it. And then the other problem happens, John, and you mentioned it, is, if you don't feel things starting to loosen up in the first mile or two, well, what does happen is oftentimes you do feel it, like at mile 2, you're like, I'm getting it, like I'm actually starting to feel better. And then then you keep doing for the 10 miles. But part of the reason you start to feel better is you've actually made some different neural connections in your brain that have actually retrained how you run.
Yeah.
And so now actually it actually feels okay. And I always think about it as it's kind of the same thing that happens when you get off the bike in a triathlon and you start to run. The first mile or two doesn't feel right,
Mm-hmm.
but your body figures out a way
Yeah. Right.
to make it feel better. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think it is an interesting thing. And if we're going to talk about basically once again how to avoid this,
Mm-hmm.
the number one way to avoid this is proper increases in volume and intensity,
Right.
and not ever increasing volume or intensity too rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, you're not going to get DOMS. You're not going to have situations where you have to alter how you're running,
Mm-hmm.
how you're riding, or whatever the case may be, because this can happen with riding too, especially if you've been running a lot. And let's say you're running a lot and your hamstrings are really feeling it. Well, you'll change how you hip extend,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think that this, and John, once again, we've talked so much about proper load and
Yeah.
and training loads, but this can be an indicator that your load is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And it's easy to overreach.
Oh,
You
so
know, something we were talking about before we hit record is, you know, in the beginning of your building of fitness, you see some pretty quick and big gains early on.
yep.
They're not always physiologically related. They may be neuro related, but in any case, you're seeing big gains. But then you reach a level of fitness and the gains start to get smaller. They're still important, but they're smaller and we still want that gain. And so we're always trying to push a little bit more, do an extra session or a little longer. And before you know it, we run into this load that is not manageable.
So I think we've done a good job explaining why we get it.
Yep.
So this paper was this is a really interesting paper because this paper was it's about triathletes.
Hmm.
It was specifically adopted or specifically written to talk about triathletes that are doing multiple events in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So it's really a popular thing now in high level triathlon to do a race on a Saturday or a Friday even, and then do a relay on the maybe the day after even.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at this, they were really looking at like how could we mitigate the DOMS from a race, and
Yeah.
DOMS from a race is difficult because almost always you get some DOMS from a race because in general you're going to be going harder than you go in training.
Yeah.
And so I think I loved reading this paper because these are the things that I teach in class as well, because this is actually important for a lot of sports where we have multiple events.
Hmm.
So think of like a track meet, right?
Or
Where we've got
soccer tournament. Yeah,
a
track. Yeah, yeah.
soccer tournament or whatever the case may be, where you have multiple events, or even let's say a stage race in cycling,
Right.
where you're going day after day after day. So there are things we can do to mitigate the pain associated with DOMS. But the question I always ask this, and ask this of my students, and I'll ask you, John, to think about this, is do we want to?
Mhm. Well, it goes back to where we started, is you do need to introduce some damage because that's the training response that your body tries to adapt to that. But are you talking about, do you want to for a tournament or for a track meet or?
Let's say for triathlon, let's say we're training for a triathlon,
Yeah.
right? And on Monday, I wake up because I had a long run and
Mhm.
some downhill in it. On Monday, I wake up and my legs they're sore.
Well,
Do I want to do things at that point to get rid of the soreness?
I think there's two ways to look at this. One is, and you're right, I like that about this paper is they were talking about sequential racing. Like,
Yeah.
and we see it at nationals. People will go, they
Yeah.
qualify for the Olympic, and then they do the sprint the next day.
Yeah.
Or,
And-
professional, where we have Super League, or you've got these series of races in triathlon, and we don't have a lot of research on how to prepare for that, let alone how to recover from one race and then be ready to perform on another race. Because typically we have a race on, a Friday, our key race, then we may take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before we really start ramping up our training again. And so that period of time is very compressed now in this sequential type of racing. So to your point, I think if I'm training for an event that has sequential training, I am going to want to train when my muscles are sore and try to figure out strategies for how to work around that.
Yeah, but let's say you're not. Let's say you're doing what you normally do. So you race, and then you're going to race a month later.
I'm all about consistent training, and so I am trying to train one day so that I don't introduce so much stress that I can't train the next day. And so I'm of the opinion that the mistake would have been made on the training day.
Yeah. Oh, you're
Not,
right. But let's hypothetically say you're not, you do make that mistake.
well, okay, so now knowing what we know about this sport and I do look for ways to get around and still train, but not compound, not have an additive negative effect of training. So, for example, when my wife wanted to go do a long hike up in Charleston, we did that. We did 10 miles. I wasn't ready for 10 miles, especially up there in Charleston. I was so sore, but I planned on running in the water the next day or maybe 2 days. And so now I had a way to still train, but not have an additive negative effect.
No, I love this, and this is, you're going exactly where I wanted you to go with this, in that oftentimes athletes read papers like this,
Mhm.
and they say, "Oh, I'm going to get sore from my training, and I don't want to be sore, so
Mhm.
I'm going to do things to help not be sore."
Right.
But what they don't do is they you can take away the pain,
Mhm.
but you don't increase the healing.
Mhm.
Right? Because what we do need is, we need, if we tear our muscles or
Mhm.
damage our muscles, we actually do need to recover. So the question there, this is how I tell my students is, if I was to be able to give this athlete an injection into their legs and just take their pain away, and they can go and train, would that be
Mhm.
a good thing? And
Right.
the answer is no,
Yeah. Right.
right? But once again, if we go back to, they're a high level athlete and they're competing again the next day,
Mhm.
is that injection thing a good idea? And it very well might be,
Yeah.
right? Because they're, if we're seriously just talking about performance, not having that aching pain
Mhm.
is a good thing. So all of these things that they were talking about are good at decreasing the amount of pain,
Mhm.
or the things that did have some evidence to support. But what we don't have a lot of evidence on is that anything is actually going to increase the rate of healing
Right.
that's going to occur. There was only one thing in there that I kind of came away with that actually might increase the healing rate, and that was looking at protein intake and
Mhm. Yeah.
amino
To
acid
increase it.
intake,
Right. Right.
right? Because that actually does make sense to me. If I increase, or if I make sure I have the appropriate
Mhm.
amount of amino acids and protein, that ultimately that could potentially speed up the healing. The other
Mhm.
one that kind of made some sense to me was doing the compression, because if we do compression, we can actually maybe increase uh, blood flow to, I know
Mhm.
it sounds counterintuitive, but subsequently when you compress, then you relax, you can actually get an
Mhm.
increase in blood flow in and an increase of blood flow out of the damaged muscle. So there are some physiologic things that we can do, but a lot of the things, like, let's say going for a walk, right? So
Mhm.
doing like an active recovery,
Mhm.
is that making you better? I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's doing the same thing. It's increasing blood flow and making you better. But I think we need to be careful about, kind of some snake oil
Yeah.
stuff in recovery.
Oh, totally. And I think this paper it does a good job of sort of highlighting that there aren't any necessarily solid answers. And doing this type of research on recovery is really hard because there's so many factors that you've got to control, not only what the exercise session is like, but then what the recovery portion is like. So you mentioned even compression and intermittent compression. Well, what phase is on pressure, what phase is off pressure, how long do you do it, what's the dose that you try to introduce? There's so many variables, it's really hard to set up a controlled study. But something I also caught in the paper, I don't know if you saw this as well, they just sort of glossed over it, but they actually stated something to the fact of, if the athlete believes
Yeah.
that whatever the target was that they were talking about is working, it's probably best to just leave that alone and let them believe it, because that
Absolutely.
belief is important.
The problem is for you and I, we read this stuff and now I can't believe it
I
anymore.
know.
'Cause
Or
I
you
read
just
it.
say everything's working. Yeah, this is going to work. This is going
Yeah.
to work. But that mindset that something's going to work, it's amazing. We've talked about this in several different areas, and it is amazing how that mindset does come back. And I mean, if you just have that negative nine mindset, recovery is going to be that much harder.
No, I agree. And it's part of the reason why like flashy toys and stuff, they
Yeah.
make you feel better. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man, I spent $400 on this. Of course it's gonna work, right?
But if you believe it works and you get back going, then it's $400 well spent.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some of the things that they talked about obviously was the, foam rolling, compression. What else do we have, John?
Ice, heat,
Ice and
um,
heat. Yeah.
I'm looking at my list here. Active recovery, nutrition. I'm a little upset they didn't mention running and exercising in the water
They
though.
did. No, they did.
Oh,
Yeah,
where
there was a
I missed
point
it.
where they talked about it. It was, I think it was in the ice area. They talked about actually getting in and they talked about the the compressive forces of the
Yeah,
water.
yeah.
They did mention that.
Oh,
Um,
I
at some
missed
point.
that. So,
Yeah.
okay, I take that back because I really put a lot of value. I've done a little bias here because I've done a lot of research on running in the water, and I think there is a lot of value, especially with the exercise induced muscle soreness and delayed onset muscle soreness. So,
So the one I did want to talk on because I think it's pretty relevant and it's a hot topic, even though it's cold, is the cold water immersion.
yeah,
I know we've talked about this before.
yeah,
And this paper actually says, there is some decent evidence to support that this can actually decrease your delayed onset muscle soreness.
So let's talk about the type of cold therapy they were talking
Yeah.
about.
So
Because
they're talking
ice
about
packs.
getting in a cold tub between 11 and 15 degrees Celsius. So quickly my Canadian brain,
11,
47
yeah.
to like 58 degrees about.
My mother-in-law says double Celsius and add 30, and that
Okay,
gets
yeah,
close
that
enough.
doesn't work.
It gets you close enough. So
Um,
11 would be about 52,
yeah,
so around 50. And what was the other
I,
one?
15, so like about 50 to 60 degrees. So cold water, right?
Yeah.
Cold enough that you'd want to wear an extra thick wetsuit to swim in it.
Mm-hmm. This is Army
So
Alaska water temp.
exactly. So for 11 to 15 minutes is what they put in. And but the question always comes back to with cold water is that
Mhm.
it does reduce the feeling of pain the next day. But we don't know, and the jury is still out on this in the research, if this actually in some sports they've actually had some good research on this, that the long-term training impact will be, and we've talked about this before, the long-term training impact can be affected.
Mhm.
What we think happens is this slows down or delays the normal inflammatory process that we want to have occurring.
Mhm.
And so, yes, it will make you feel better the next day. And especially if you need to race again, you don't care about the training effect,
Yeah. And
right?
I'm glad you said it because I think that's what their focus on
Yep.
in this paper was being able to race the next day.
So if I was working with you, John, you said, hey, I'm going to go do US Nationals next year and I'm going to do this Olympic race on Saturday, sprint race on Sunday, you would absolutely do cold water immersion if I was training you. I'd
Yeah.
say that is like probably the thing that will make you feel the best the next day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is also some evidence, especially in really hot training. So this weekend, right, we're going to do some really hot training that doing some whole body cooling afterwards can actually lower your overall stress.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about like overall stress, like cortisol and stress hormones and stuff like that. And John, you do this all the time because I know you. Is you finish your long ride and you go and jump in your pool,
Yeah, love it.
right? And what you're doing is you're actually bringing your core temperature down
Mhm.
really quite rapidly.
Mhm.
Whereas if you come home and I don't know, this is what I do, is I'm devastated, right? And I just lay on the couch, don't even shower because I can't muster the strength to go up my stairs to shower,
Wow.
and I'm still hot for a while. It's probably not as good
Yeah.
as far as like the overall stress. Now, the exception is if I'm doing heat stress training because I'm going to go to Kona, jumping in the pool might not be the best thing.
That's right.
Right? Because I can actually I can keep that heat stress longer.
Yeah.
And have a better adaptation. So once again, who knows, depending on the modality or your goals, they could be completely different. So, I mean, John, you're trying to get ready for a race in December in Wells. It's not going to be
it's not
a hot weather race, right? So
cold swim.
Yeah. So your thermal training might not be the key for you right now. But if you're getting ready to go race in Kona, I'd say probably don't jump in the pool right away. Maybe wait a half hour and then jump in the pool.
Yeah, no, and the heat stress and sitting in a sauna, you can get a lot of training benefit from that. But again, this paper, it's interesting how they are focused on this sequential type of racing, and that is a different approach for triathlon versus knowing you're going to do a race and then you're going to have a month before you really get back into something into some training.
So the other one I think that was interesting they mentioned, and we haven't talked about this in a while, is sleep, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's another one of it's especially sequential racing days. So we've talked about sleep issues before, and I've talked about some of my sleep issues with racing. So I can't even imagine racing 2 days in a row because I don't sleep well the night before the race.
That's right.
So if I have 2 nights in a row of not sleeping well, so I'm thinking about me if I was to do U.S. nationals like that, where I would not sleep well, get up early, race hard, have this, just adrenaline going through my system, lots of caffeine probably. Then the next night have the same anxiety again about racing the next day, and then having the anxiety of, oh man, I'm going to be sore tomorrow.
I don't know. I think you got to try that, and it'll be interesting to see if you sleep better the second night or before the second race.
All I can tell you is after the Ironman, I think I slept 12 minutes that night. just too wired,
Oh yeah, and all the caffeine that you take.
All the caffeine and just your body being active for so long. But so I actually would suggest that, and this is going to be a weird suggestion or thing to think about, but like maybe if you're going to do subsequent racing, is do whatever you can to get the good night's sleep in between. So the room cool, make sure it's extra dark, make sure it's quiet. Whatever supplements you want to take, if you want to take melatonin or tart cherry juice or whatever the case may be. For me, I would probably do something maybe in prescription just to get my muscles to relax and to sleep. And but I think that is a crucial part. And it's nice that they've talked about this in these subsequent races. But same with training, right? If you get a big training weekend, and I mean the last thing you want to do in a big training weekend is go out late a couple nights, so it's tomorrow night I'm going to stay up late and train the next night stay up late because my friends are coming from out of town, it's a long weekend. It's not going to go well for you, and your muscle soreness is definitely going to be worse.
Well, and the paper talks about the importance of having that long-term healthy sleep habit. And we have a colleague, Dr. Graham McGinnis, who looks at what he calls, or what researchers call, social jet lag, where it's not jet lag because you're changing time zones, but it's jet lag because your weekend hours are different than your weekday hours or something along that line.
It's not a school night.
That's right. Here in Vegas, it may be a little different because of the 24-hour nature of the city, but that I think that's important as well. Is that if you've got to have that regular sleep pattern and try not to have these big changes in your sleep pattern, because you got that disturbance is what ultimately is going to cause you to pay the price.
John, I'm so glad we're actually talking about this because we were actually talking about this off the line off air before we started, but we're trying to do something exceptional. Like, that's the fun part about triathlon. It's exceptional. Just to think about it, like the average age group triathlete is maybe doing 10 sessions a week, just on average, right? 10, or maybe let's say 9, 3, and 2. So 9 sessions a week. If we take the average runner, the average swimmer, the
Mhm.
average biker, the average soccer player,
Mhm.
they're not doing 9 things a week,
Right.
right? So they can get away with a little bit of the social jet lag.
Mhm.
I contend that if you're going to be doing triathlon training, serious triathlon training, and I call it serious when you're starting to do 9 sessions per week, probably serious at less than that even.
Right.
That sleep absolutely becomes critical, and then in general, recovery from the training needs to be spot on. Like,
Mhm.
and the recovery can literally be just recovery. It can't.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need all those modalities.
Mhm.
You know, and we talked about this before as well. Is like, go lay on the couch,
Yeah.
right? Watch a movie, binge
Mhm.
watch a TV show. You know, instead of running around doing everything. Like, it's a horrible thing for me to admit, but my garage is a mess. My house is usually a mess.
Yeah.
And it's because but when I'm injured, it's not. Everything's clean. But when I'm training hard and I'm building towards something,
Yeah.
4 weeks before an event, when it's kind of like my bigger week, I hate to admit it, like my life turns into a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
Could I stay up an hour later and do this? No, I could, but I need to rest. Or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's
Well, it just made me think of the post that one of our favorite listeners, Rick Simpson, posted about he.
oh yes.
I'm going to get it wrong, but it was, he's trying to train and do all the cleaning of the house, and he's finally going to have to give up something, and he's giving up the cleaning of the house. So
Yeah.
I'm not doing it justice, but
That's the gist of it, right? Is you can't do it all, and there's a reason why, like, professional triathlon really can be a professional triathlete if that's the only thing they have.
hmm
Right? But for most of us age groupers, until we retire,
yeah.
we also have full-time jobs we got to attend to, and um
Well, and I'm glad you are differentiating between different sports because the unique thing about triathlon training is the logistics of each training session. It's not the same. It's not 9 sessions of the same type
yeah,
of routine. It's okay, well, I got to get to the pool on this day and I got to get all my pool stuff ready, or I got to do a bike ride. Either I'm leaving from the house or I'm going somewhere for the bike ride. So you got to pack that up and the run. I mean, I don't want to say one sport's harder than the other, but it is, the unique aspect of triathlon is the logistics that you've got to manage.
especially to make it fit in your life.
Yeah, right,
Right?
right.
Like, if you
Well,
had a pool in your backyard, a 25-yard pool in your backyard,
yeah,
and life gets a little easier. If you don't have a job to go to and you got your running gear and stuff right at your house, and you got your bike stuff right at your house, and you got good roads right from your house, okay, easier. But we don't live in that world.
no, and this is why what you said is important is that this is why you've got to plan out the recovery. And I was thinking back when we came up with this topic again, uh, recovery of DOMS. I realized that our two most common topics that we come back to are load,
Yep.
the stress that you introduce, and recovery.
Always.
We keep coming back to these because they're both so important. You got to introduce the right amount of load, and you've got to purposefully plan the recovery purposely. And
And,
that
and don't be
recovery
ashamed of
part,
it.
no, that's right. And that recovery part is often overlooked. And so I think again, that's why we keep coming back to this topic, is because we hear stories, we hear, our friends and athletes doing things, and you got to recover. You have to get ready for that next session, sort of like what this paper is talking about, or recover even for the long-term sustainability of the sport.
So, John, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag a little bit here and tell people you're taking an entrepreneurial class. Is that okay? I'm guessing
Yeah.
I did it. I outed you. How about this for an idea? I should just put this, shouldn't put this in the air,
Yeah.
but we should create like a Strava for recovery.
Ooh, there you go.
What'd you do? What'd you do for your recovery? Oh, I
That's
sat
right.
around, I ate a half a pizza, and I laid her on the couch and I watched this on TV. Or
All right, that's it right there. And Strava does not have I'm going to look quickly. It does not have a recovery option as an activity, does it?
nope.
That is brilliant right there. Ted, let's do it. Anyone listening, if you want to help us do that, this
Yep.
is Yeah.
So on Training Peaks, we can put in recovery days,
Yeah.
right? But the interesting thing with the recovery day, you don't get to turn it green,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like you don't get to say, yes, I
You
actually
don't get rewarded for it through their
there's
algorithm at all.
there's no reward
No.
for it.
Like
You
yeah,
know,
and you get penalized
you
because
get you
I'm
do.
trying to string together, some long training blocks. So, I'm going anywhere 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and then I take a day off, and you go, "Ooh, you see a little dip," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I
So
don't want
what
that
you
dip."
but what you have to look at is so you have to change your mindset around this, and you have to look
Yeah,
at the yellow number instead, right?
that's right.
You
Right.
look at your form,
Hmm.
not your and I hate the fact that on Training Peaks they call is it what do they call fitness? Oh, fitness is form,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But you really should be looking at your what's it, the TSB
Hmm.
express
Hmm.
balance,
Yeah.
right? Instead of instead
No,
of
no,
your
I'm not looking at that.
instead of your fitness number, because you're right, you take a day off and your
Yeah,
fitness drops, and you're like,
that's
how
right.
does my fitness drop on a day I'm recovering? It's actually
That's right.
going the other
It should be
way.
going up. Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right.
I think that this is a really good idea. We
I
need to
love
come
it.
up with a some kind
Mhm.
of metric of how
Well,
you
and
recover.
then, having all the different options for recovery, because I think that's the mindset. Again, when we're thinking of starting in the sport, we're seeing these gains and we're like, well, we do something, we gain, we do something, we gain, we do something, we gain. But yet, once you get to a certain level of fitness, you're not going to gain if you're not taking the time to recover.
Yeah, but the fitter you get, the less you feel like you need
Yeah.
to recover
Yeah.
because you're not as sore, right?
Hmm.
I'm getting back into some pretty serious training after a little hiatus, and man, I'm sore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
like, yeah, that's that feeling I've been looking for. But then I'm like, am I too sore? Should I take the day off?
Yeah.
I can't take the day off. I'm on my upswing here.
I know.
And it becomes difficult.
It does, and yes, it's hard to come back from some time off. And again, that's the fear of doing recovery, though, because we think we're moving backwards. But you're right; it's the mindset that we really need to have, that recovery is good.
We need some kind of reward system for recovery.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. All right. We're gonna have to brainstorm on this
I
one.
like it.
All right. Well, hey, John, that was great
That's
tonight.
good.
I hope you have an awesome weekend of training. I'm gonna have an awesome weekend of recovery.
Yeah, that's
That's my
right.
goal. I got an extra day to recover.
I like it.
Yeah. And when the time changes, that's an extra hour of recovery. That's what we're gonna start calling it.
I think we're onto something here. This is good.
I do too.
All
All
right.
right.
Hey, have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Talk soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.